Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's discussion. This week, we're going to be talking about AAA games and what expectations come along with the label AAA and what makes them successful versus what causes them to fail. Um, I guess the first thing that we should discuss is what is a AAA game, because AAA is a label that we use to talk about big budget, big production games. But there's also a lot of pieces to that puzzle that are not just like the games you've heard of, um, where you get massive budgets, hundreds of millions of dollars being spent on these games. Um, and for those massive budgets, you have incredibly large teams, long production cycles. Um, that creates a this premium quality, where you get incredibly realistic graphics, extensive, very deep storytelling, a lot of detail, but also from the professional side of things, it also is something that's heavily marketed. A lot of times, these large AAA games will spend, $100 million on their budget, their actual development budget, and then they'll spend $100 million on marketing. A lot of times, marketing it can include, big trailers and appearances on um, large stages, your video game awards, trailers, and showcases. They can include partnerships with other companies, other products. It can also be large campaigns in the real world. Not just something that you'll see on the internet, but I've seen some very interesting real uh, real life, I guess, showcases, demonstrations that tie into games for game marketing. Some of them include like the Yakuza series doing giant, I guess, blocking out sections of Tokyo, and doing marketing campaigns in Tokyo. The huge displays you see at like E3 when it was around, or GDC, or um, the Tokyo Game Show. I know Halo's a big example of a lot of really big marketing campaigns. Halo's done huge things where they've like had real drivable warthogs in the um, around convention spaces, and additionally, your those partnerships I talked about with other products and things, the Halos game fuel um, campaign with Mountain Dew, geez, for Halo 3, I think, Halo 2, Halo 3, so that would have been almost 20 years ago now. This is something that these marketing campaigns kind of like, they spend a lot of money because the word of mouth isn't enough for these. This is like doing doing a marketing strategy for a movie, where you need to get millions of people to buy your game. You need to get everyone and anyone who may be interested needs to know about your game. So you spend a lot of money doing that. And again, like I said, they tend to take a long time to create. Um, you can have, on average, 3 to 7 years for a large team to create a game, but some games can be even longer than that, with infamously long development cycles, like Cyberpunk being over 10 years, Final Fantasy 15 being, I think, 10 years. It might have been 15. Um, Kingdom Hearts 3 being a million years. There's a lot of examples of a lot of this money is being spent to create these epic games, and a lot of that goes into very long development cycles, and large teams, because these studios tend to be very very large, and a lot of times these games can span multiple studios. One of the like, I don't want to say easier, but one of the more common ways for indie development studios to get uh, titles under their belt is to be basically outsourced development uh, manpower for these AAA games. I have a friend who runs a studio, who his studio did some of the multiplayer uh, development for Halo Infinite, and um, that was just something that 343 and Microsoft outsourced to them because they didn't have enough people, but they had the money to spend, so they were able to bring other studios in to help with that. That can, lead to varying success depending on the quality of the of the studios that you bring in, but it's like any contracting work. Um, so basically, these big characteristics are, oops, didn't mean to do that, are massive budgets, high quality, huge marketing campaigns, very long development cycles, and they're all being done by very large studios and very large publishers. Um, they tend to release either on exclusive consoles when the publisher is the company that makes the console themselves, so your Sony's, Microsoft's, and Nintendo's, um, or have wide releases and hit a lot of consoles to get as much of an audience as possible. So, what makes a successful AAA game? These are all examples of classically successful, I'd say, AAA titles, things kind of spanning the entire, more or less, the entire history of video games. So, Final Fantasy VII. I mean, obviously, Call of Duty, Elden Ring, Last of Us are more recent, more contemporary um, examples of successful AAA titles. But Final Fantasy VII was the first, the first massive, or the first massively successful game with a massive budget. Um, it was, I believe, estimated to be about $40 million for development and $40 million for marketing back in 1997. Um, Square, I guess at the time, SquareSoft, Square spent a absolutely enormous amount of money to kind of level up Final Fantasy to the next um, cycle, to the next generation of consoles, putting it on PlayStation. They had a lot of backing with Sony to do that, but they spent a lot of money, and this works out to about 152 million ish dollars today after inflation. And as you can see, they've spent about the same amount of money on marketing as they did on the actual game, um, because they knew they needed to get millions of people to play this game. Call of Duty is a very similar circumstance, something that's actually, I guess, kind of been like a hallmark of AAA game development over the past 20 years. The Call of Duty franchise has on it, like, as a whole, made $30 billion in revenue, and does an annual release which consistently does well. A lot of that is given to its multiplayer component. Um, but the foundation for Call of Duty in the first couple of like very successful Call of Duty games were also incredibly detailed stories within the time frame. So the original Call of Duty 1, 2, and 3 all being World War II games, and then Modern Warfare being a contemporary Call of Duty game, being the first one. I know that when, like, what originally drew me to Call of Duty was the original Call of Duty was it being a World War II game. And at the time, that concept was kind of new. World War II games were Call of Duty did it the best. You had Medal of Honor. and similar franchises that all kind of copied the mold that Call of Duty had done very well, and they combined solid um, shooting mechanics and gameplay, and at the time graphics, with very consistent multiplayer experiences. But they also told good stories about people in the war, the theaters of war that they were set in. So that was really the foundation. And now that it's become kind of that war zone, live service, always online thing, you get a little bit less focus on the story and the single player campaigns. But Call of Duty still does a really good job of putting out a serviceable or consistently good single player experience as well as a multiplayer experience with every release. I guess to a varying success level, but the last couple have been pretty good for that. And next you have Elden Ring, which kind of a novel idea, I guess, when it was first released or when it was first announced, where From Software, who's famous for their the Dark Souls, Demon Souls, the Souls like or Soulsborne genre, incredibly difficult fantasy, dark fantasy, single player action games. Um, when they teamed up with George R. Martin, the author of Game of Thrones, or the Game of Thrones, the Song of Ice and Fire books, and uh, contracted him to write out the game, create this world, they kind of hit it out of the park and really did elevate the Souls-like genre again with a massively successful release. It currently, Elden Ring has the highest Metacritic rating for any game on PlayStation 5, though that I guess says a little bit less than it could. Sorry, I had to move my mic. But also boasts, one of the highest ratings across every platform that it's on. And won multiple Game of the Year awards. I think it was like every Game of the Year award for the year it came out, and also the expansion was was good enough to be nominated from last year. Shadow of the Erd Tree. So consistent, amazing, scope of a world that is consistently high quality and really kind of produced correctly to get the interest. And then there's Last of Us Part Two, which continues kind of the I guess the pedigree of Naughty Dog's ability to write compelling narratives, and they dump a whole bunch of money into it and make a very high quality, hyper realistic experience, and really push boundaries with the writing and with the action and everything, and the world building. And while The Last of Us Part Two may have some detractors as to whether or not certain elements were good, it did kind of become kind of a benchmark for top quality AAA games when it was released. So what did all these games have in common? How did they do? How did they become successes? Um, Phone was ringing. How did they become successes? How did they? Uh, so what makes these games successful? What's that common factor that kind of binds these all together? Is these are the hallmarks that we know in the AAA space. And the answer may surprise you, but it's that they made a lot of money. Um, um, one of the important kind of benchmarks for AAA games is that they cost a lot of money to make. They're they're obviously huge risks for companies. You spend hundreds of millions of dollars in a game and want to make sure that you get, a profit out of it. Um, but these examples that I've given are examples of that being converted successfully. So um, each of these games, so Final Fantasy, I use Modern Warfare 2, the most recent one. Um, and Elden Ring, Last of Us Part Two. These are the examples. They've all sold tens of millions of copies. So, 13 million for Final Fantasy VII in 1997 is a huge number for sales. 25 years ago now, more than 25 years ago now, 28 years ago. Jeez. Um, 30 million copies of Call of Duty, 20 million copies of Elden Ring. These are the numbers that need to be converted when looking at a development cost of an equal of an equally high number. But more importantly, these games made a lot of money for multiple reasons. The biggest one being that they're very good. When you look at your Metacritic scores for these titles, they're all very high, with Elden Ring being, as I said before, one of the highest rated games of all time. Um, so part of the success of AAA games is that they are very high quality, very good experiences that a lot of people buy into. But in addition, they are also successfully converted through that marketing that I discussed before. Um, in order to get 13 million people to buy Final Fantasy VII in 1997, you have to spend a lot of money to get the brand in front of those people to sell it to them. Elden Ring, another great example of this, required a lot of marketing and a lot of tailoring around the idea that this was a Souls game made by FromSoft, written by George R.R. Martin, which at the time when all of this was incredibly relevant with the success of Game of Thrones and the success of Dark Souls, um, kind of that was the drawing point that they really focused on for their marketing, and they did very well because of it. On the flip side, you have Call of Duty and The Last of Us that rode success off of being part of successful franchises. So The Last of Us being a highly awaited sequel for the original Last of Us, and then Call of Duty being, I mean, Modern Warfare 2 specifically being a remake of one of the best Call of Duty games of all time, um, was kind of that factor, that thing that they focus on in their marketing, and gets a lot of people hyped. So you generate a lot of hype, you spend a lot of money on the games, and the result is you sell a lot of copies. Of course, that requires, as I just said, the games to be quality, to be good, which is where we get to our next slide, which is the failures in the AAA space. Some of these are, I mean, they're all fairly recent and relevant, but some of these are a bit more, I guess, a bit larger of a failure, a more prevalent failure in modern culture. First one is Concord. I had to include Concord because this is kind of one of the most surreal stories of a game that had um, a lot of money pumped into it, and a very everything went wrong with it. Um, so for those who don't know, Concord was released last year. It's a multiplayer hero shooter, kind of like Overwatch. It shut down 2 weeks, 3 weeks after, 17 days after um, it was released. The game cost $120 million to develop. I think they spent another like $300 million on marketing um, and other costs, and spent, I think it was something like 7 or 8 years in development for this game. And it's a complete failure. Nobody played it. Nobody wanted it. Nobody liked it. There's a lot of factors in that. It's not just that, oh, the gameplay was bad, or um, there were bugs and things like that. With Concord, it was something that was supposed to be a new IP. It was supposed to be this, thing kind of comparable in interest to Overwatch, but nobody really knew about it. It wasn't something. I don't think that it. I haven't really analyzed the marketing strategy for it, but considering how much money they spent on it and how little people knew about it, um, it feels like that their marketing strategy was just wildly incorrect. You have um, a completely new IP, which I think was revealed maybe 6 months before release, and there wasn't a lot of actual push for it from Sony after it was revealed. Um, Compound that onto the idea that hero shooters in general are kind of not a very popular um, genre these days. And have been on the decline ever since Overwatch 2 came out. It's not something that is a very relevant genre now. I think Valorant being the most successful example of that, that's still successful today. But overall, hero shooters are not something that are very is very popular genre. And then they wanted to make this kind of a hallmark, title, a hallmark IP for Sony that presented characters and the world building and everything in a very kind of like flat, bland way that people weren't very interested in. And there's a lot of other kind of, I guess, counterculture kind of response to it. A lot of debate happening on the internet whether or not um, the the aspects of Concord were good or not. Suffice to say, it was a complete failure, and it cost Sony hundreds of millions of dollars. Next up, we have Mass Effect Andromeda, which this is an example, prime example, similarly to Cyberpunk, which is our next example, where um, technical issues with the game really killed the launch of those games. So Mass Effect is one of my favorite franchises in video games. But it was a very successful franchise through the early 2000s and 2010s, and then this Andromeda was supposed to be kind of like the big like return to the world. So it was an established franchise. It was a highly hyped game. People were very excited to be back in the Mass Effect universe, but it released with massive numbers of technical bugs, of issues. The most famous being the facial animation issues in the screenshot in the in the slide, where they were just wild all over the place. Things were messing up everywhere, and the to the point where Mass Effect Andromeda was near unplayable with how bad these bugs were, and then that caused a massive number of people that would have I was one of them that would have enjoyed the game, or would have been easy purchases of a Mass Effect game, just completely avoid it because there were too many issues. And the result of this is that Mass Effect and BioWare kind of hasn't really been. And it's funny, actually, I use their next title as an example too, but it kind of froze a lot of the momentum for the Mass Effect universe and for BioWare as a studio for a long time. And we are just now, I think last year they announced Mass Effect 4, or whatever the new Mass Effect is called. They're finally going back to the universe, but whether or not it's effective, whether or not people can get over the idea that the bad taste that Andromeda left in their mouths, is to be seen. Similarly to Mass Effect, Cyberpunk also, as I said, had a ton of technical issues, a ton of performance issues, strange bugs, and poor poorly designed AI and all sorts of problems. I've talked extensively about the problems with Cyberpunk in this class, um, but the biggest one is that Cyberpunk was a very hyped game for a very long time, had an incredibly high um, production budget, and really put CD Projekt Red, um, pardon the pun, I guess, but in the red when it launched and didn't do very well. Um, and by didn't do very well, I mean that it was pulled from the PlayStation Store because of those performance issues. Steam offered refunds very early on for it, and um, the backlash from CD Projekt Red's investors, shareholders, caused a massive drop in their value as a company. Um, there's there's reasons for Cyberpunk to have been released the way that it was, and I've just talked before about how it's a success story, and they were able to salvage the game and fix those issues with the updates to the game, with the expansion with Phantom Liberty. But a large part of the issue with Cyberpunk was the corporate side of the publishers, the developer, and the shareholders really kind of driving, like, we want this game out. Um, they got a lot of pressure from their shareholders, from their executives to push the game, and not delay, because they delayed it multiple times, and they were basically saying, don't delay it anymore. We need to release this game, and it was incomplete. It was unpolished when it was released, and that was the result. And our final example is Anthem, which is kind of unfortunate. It's another BioWare title where it was kind of a perfect storm of BioWare coming off of Andromeda not doing well. They're starting to become a bit of flack for live service games. Live service games were really kind of encroaching in the market, and people were kind of like, we don't want live service games. Why do we have to, continue to spend money on top of the game to get the full experience? But the issue with Anthem was, while it looks good, it looks very beautiful, and seems like a really cool concept. It didn't have, when it launched, it didn't have anything to do. It was a lack of content, a lack of kind of what the game was, and caused caused a large backlash against EA, where they decided that after there weren't any players playing the game, that they were going to completely abandon the title. They shut down the servers, and decided not to continue developing the game. So again, the issue with massive amounts of money being spent on these titles, on Anthem, to a lukewarm reception, whether or not it was poor marketing versus not hitting the correct points in the market, where the correct pressure points, where people are actually looking for this game, and not having anything to do when people were actually playing the game, created kind of this black hole that kind of consumed Anthem, and um, destroyed it. And so how do we analyze what makes a successful, what makes a good AAA game? Given all of these different points that I've hit throughout the presentation, you could probably put this together, but there's some key factors that are important when discussing quality, success in AAA gaming. And it's not just, budgets and marketing. It's not just, we spent a lot of money on this game, we spent a lot of money marketing this game, and now people are playing it. Inherently, AAA games have a large investment and therefore have a large risk involved. Companies do spend hundreds of millions of dollars, and from a business standpoint, they need to make up that cost through the revenue from the game. Um, so unlike an indie game with a significantly smaller budget, or even like a mid-sized game, AAA games have a huge cost sunk into it from the get-go, and have a lot more pressure on them to perform very well to be able to make up for that. So the result of that is a lot of games, a lot of AAA games, fail to innovate in the spaces given their large production cost uh, that they could. A lot of times, AAA games are incredibly successful or incredibly um, technical marvels and hugely complex games, and more often than not, um, especially when you talk about franchises, they tend to be iterations on formulas that already exist. Call of Duty being a prime example of that. Um, even to a lesser extent, because they do innovate a lot more, but even like Dark Souls games, Dark Souls 2, Dark Souls 3, even Elden Ring is kind of an iteration on the formula of a Souls like game, that isn't really pushing too much innovation wise. Um, Versus kind of where this is done successfully, where that innovation is really shines through in a AAA title, like say Breath of the Wild, where um, it completely kind of changed the formula for a Zelda game and created kind of its own genre of open world adventure action titles. A lot of the components of Breath of the Wild are now seen in other incredibly successful open world games. Used actually a lot, kind of. I'm not really sure why this is, but it's used actually a lot in kind of um, the Hoyoverse game. So Genshin Impact takes a lot of the exploration mechanics in Breath of the Wild, the gliding, the climbing, um, exploring everything, and gathering stuff all over the open world. Like that's something that seems to be borrowed a lot from that style of game. Also, I guess it's more. It feels like it's something that's more used in Eastern developed games. So Hoyo verse being Chinese, certain Korean development studios really like the Breath of the Wild um, formula. So it's hard to want to risk that amount of money by doing something experimental. Um, where that's been kind of uh, the trend has been bucked is in actually in the first title, the title card of the presentation with Death Stranding. A lot of times when you get to certain personalities in gaming, so Hideo Kojima being kind of the biggest one, I guess, where it's kind of like a trust the process. If Kojima can raise $100 million, I didn't actually research how much Death Stranding cost, but if you can raise that much money to create that in crazy concept of a game and it does well, then that's really kind of boiled down to the to Kojima as a director, but also to Kojima's staff as a production studio. Um, they have less, I guess, concern about that risk. The next the next step in that is the thing that we want to analyze kind of the most is the technical excellence of the game. The whether or not the AAA games, their hallmark is that they look amazing, right? Like they are incredibly high quality, super realistic or super artistic if it's not exactly a hyper realistic style. Um, you know, crazy. cinematic experiences, very large stories and worlds and characters and everything. Um, that that's kind of where they push the boundary. It's how much power can we pump out of a console? Like how crazy realistic can we make the graphics, or how large can we make the cinematic moment if there's thousands of characters on screen at once, or if there's crazy particle effects and things happening, special effects. That's where they really push boundaries. And the flip side of that is that can often cause issues with optimization. Um, when you're driving the hardware of a game system to its absolute limits, then a lot of times um, things such as file size or memory requirements and things can cause issues with how the game runs. And that's something that I think really affects games like Cyberpunk or Mass Effect. Or Andromeda I don't think was as much of an issue, but the games that really struggle performance wise, Cyberpunk being the hallmark. And we talk market saturation. So a lot of times AAA games tend to be franchises, right? Um, all the Call of Duties, all of the Halos, all of the um, Mass Effects, I guess. There's plenty of AAA games whose success is tied to the fact that they are a known IP. Um, I talked about it with actually with Concord and Anthem, where these were new IPs that weren't necessarily something that people um, knew about or were interested in. So that can really cause kind of, no matter how much money you put into marketing, really not cause a hype that you want to see in the game, in the leading up to the game's release, especially in genres that are already very crowded. Live service games, shooter games, hero shooters were just a poorly conceived genre for Concord at the time, because it wasn't something that people are particularly interested in. And all of this kind of leads to the incredibly high player expectation, especially now with the prices of games increasing. If people are going to spend a large amount of money on a game purchase, they want to make sure that they're getting their money's worth. And often the consumer runs into the decision making process of, is this game worth $70 on its face value? We're not even talking with microtransactions and DLC and things like that. As I'm recording this, the most recent big AAA kind of experience that has gotten people, I guess, is the new Monster Hunter game, Monster Hunter Wilds. Is Monster Hunter Wilds worth $70? And I mean, a lot of people believe it is. It's selling very well. It's being reviewed very well. It looks beautiful. It looks like a lot of fun. Again, I've said before, I don't play Monster Hunter games because of the menus. Kind of irk me. But the expectation for a game of that size is now much higher than it was 10, 20 years ago, because of the retail price of those games. So, and with knowing how much money is actually being spent on them. So that's kind of the crux of player expectation, is making sure that you're meeting those expectations, which are getting higher and higher and higher, which are causing the prices of, or the costs of making games to be higher, and causing, as capitalism has, demanded, it increases the actual end user price of the game. So that's kind of the big points that we want to make, some things we want to look for when analyzing the game, analyzing AAA games. Or do they balance the risk and the price of the game versus what they're actually creating, what they're innovating in? Are they technically sound? Are they pushing the boundaries of graphical fidelity or epic experience? Do they fit in either a known franchise? Are they something that the hype is a lot driven by the fact that they're from that franchise? Are they a new franchise? Are they a new IP? or are they do they stand out amongst a crowded group of similar games? And do they meet player expectations? Are they worth the $70 price tag, or are they worth the $100 price tag, or whatever people are trying to claim that Grand Theft Auto 6 should be when it comes out? Um, is it worth the money? And all of that boils down into whether or not the game is successful, how much money the game makes, how many copies of the game sell, and do the games make a return on investment. And I think that's it. Oh, I have one more thing. Sorry, I totally forgot. We talked about AAA games, and you may have heard of a AA game, which is not quite a AAA game. It's kind of the in between indie and AAA. Um, I describe it as a mid tier game. They can have moderate budgets. They're usually made by smaller studios. A lot of time they are produced or published by larger publishing arms. But they're a lot of times they have smaller budgets. They're unknown or new IPs, and they're kind of a tighter scope. So if you hear the term double A, they're talking about games that can be AAA in quality and fidelity, but cost a lot less, tend to honestly sell a lot less, but that risk is lower, and the studios tend to have more artistic freedom in what they do. Um, my favorite example of this is Plague Tale, but the examples I give are Plague Tale, Hellblade, Senua's Sacrifice, and Remnant, and these are games that you look at them and you may think to yourself, these are incredibly high quality games, and they are. But compared to a AAA title, their budgets were a lot lower, their teams were a lot smaller, and their marketing arm was a lot smaller than a Grand Theft Auto, or Elden Ring. Um, but on the flip side, they get to kind of push the boundaries a lot more and do a lot more experimental stuff. So the difference when we talk AA games is that they cost a lot less, and the reason, and kind of the trickle down of everything that affects that, um, can be seen by the fact that there is a much lower investment in them than there is in a AAA title. And a lot of times the AA games lead to AAA games, um, so or lead AA studios into AAA studios. So a game like Mass Effect, the original Mass Effect, may have been considered a AA game because it wasn't, a known franchise at the time. It wasn't trying to be, at that time, I guess, a Halo or a Call of Duty, but it really stood out as being a solid experience and innovative storytelling experience, and created the AAA experience that sprouted from it with Mass Effect 2, Mass Effect 3. Yeah, and I guess similar can be said of BioWare is a really good example of this because can be said of Dragon Age. Dragon Age started kind of small scale and exploded into 2, and Inquisition being the biggest one. I mean, Veilguard, the new one, I don't have much to say about it. I haven't played it. And that'll be it for this week. That is our last. Yes, that is our last slide. Next Wednesday is the due date for our second project that you can find in the module for, I believe it's for this week. It's either this week's or last week's module. I'm going to open it up real fast. Okay, so it's last week. Project 2, Critical Analysis and Improvement of a Game's Technical Aspects. If you have any any questions or concerns about the project, or you want to get some feedback on it, you can always reach out to me via email. You can check out the office hours. The link here will open up the there we go my You Can Book Me, where you can set an appointment with me to have a one-on-one Zoom call, discuss your project, things like that. So please make sure you do that if you are have any questions about the project for next week. There will also be a discussion for this week. The discussion for this week is I'd like you to take a AAA game of your choice. Tell me why it's AAA, just how much it cost to make, how long it took to make, the bullet points of what makes a AAA game, as we discussed in the presentation. Here. And tell me whether or not you think that this game is successful technically, artistically, or I guess money wise. Yes, money wise. Sorry, I've been talking for a while. Yeah, so that's that, and just that'll be due on this Sunday, so don't miss out on that. And next week we will be discussing different game franchises and kind of how they have progressed through history. I mean, big points we're going to hit are Super Mario, Legend of Zelda, Pokemon, Halo, Call of Duty. I'll find some other ones that I want to talk about, but those are the big ones I really want to discuss. So yeah, I'll see you guys next week. Thanks.